So I want to talk about the current state of physically modeled instruments on handheld mobile devices. And just to give you a sense of contrast, when you hear an electronic musical instrument today, most often what you're hearing is a recording that's being triggered by an event and is being played back. And the types of things that we're doing are entirely different. We're actually solving the particular acoustic situation. In the case of guitar strings, we're actually solving the wave equation in real time. And because we're solving the equation rather than playing back a sample, it's possible for the user, the performer, who wishes to express themselves, it's possible for them to interact with the model in a way that you just can't do when interacting with the sample. And so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give a brief history of the modeling of musical instruments. And I was doing a little research about this today to kind of fill out my deck, and one of the interesting things that I observed is that the root of this goes back to trying to synthesize the human voice. But it goes back very far. In the 1100s, people apparently had come up with mechanical devices to synthesize the human voice. And in the mid-1800s, there was a machine, which I'll show you a picture of. It's a little creepy looking. But it was able to talk and speak when operated by an operator. And that leads us into the 20th century at Bell Labs using radio tubes, an electronic realization of voice synthesis for the 1939 World's Fair. And then that takes us forward into early digital signal processing, which is all of us, I think, are very passionate about. And it brings us forward to the point where we are now, where it's possible on a very small handheld device, including this device here, to do large-scale signal processing representation of musical instruments and creating a really interactive experience that's unlike what happens with other types of recording experiences. So I'm also going to do some demonstrations. I have like a candy store of audio samples, and I'll be playing these back. And then I'm going to do a brief overview of where we think the technology is heading. First, I'm going to do a couple demos. And you know, I think what I will start out doing is an actual demo on an app that we have in the App Store that's been there for a year. Oh, why don't I sit down then? So I'm going to start out with a quick demo of an app that's been in the App Store for about a year. And this is our very first app. And it runs on very low-powered iPhones. And let's see, there we go. We'll see if we have some volume here. I'm going to turn sideways a little bit. And is that in focus up there? Yeah. Okay, so this is our very first app. I'm sorry it's stretched out, and we don't have any volume here. That's why. Yeah, I don't know if you guys are able to hear that. Yeah. Okay, so this is a model of a guitar, and this app was really geared around the idea of strumming. The left hand is hard for people. We said, why don't we make it easy for people to strum? And one of the interesting things about this app is that if you strum it here versus here, it does what a real guitar does. You get a different sound. You can finger pick it. You can stroke the strings. And you can even play harmonics on it. Things that just can't be done with any sample-based or recorded-based system. So this is our first app, and it's out there. You can download it if you want to. And the direction that we took this is we said what we're trying to do is create an experience where the mass of virtually everyone can play a guitar-like instrument even if you don't have the skill to play the guitar. And a little bit later I'll show a video of my 8-year-old daughter playing Purple Haze. But we set this app up so that you could just, either by strumming or tapping, you could play music. And all of the left-hand stuff you see at the top, this is the stuff that the left hand of the guitar player is doing. That's been reduced either to an auto advance or to an arrow that you hit. So let's just try this. I'm going to pick this device up. So this, again, this is the, thank you. first app that we did. And what we wound up doing along the way is we built a very elaborate model, the most elaborate model for a guitar that, that has been done to date. And we have another app that's coming out now, which I will just briefly show, another demonstration of. I'm going to show it by way of video. Where are the videos? There we go. So we were, just 2 weeks ago, we were at a trade show, and we were showing this new app that we had, and it's based on all the same underlying layers of model, solving the wave equation in real time, all the various nuances that we put together for that model. But this is set up now for the right hand. And so we had some real professional musicians, not me, play it. And it's possible to achieve a level of performance that is like a real guitar player. That's not a guitar player, that's a guy playing in the service of an iPad. I'll scan forward so that you can see that. Okay, here we go. There he is. This is Marco Parisi. He's a really excellent keyboard player. And he's using this new app that we have called GeoShred. He's playing it all on the surface of the iPad. I'm very attuned to the sound of the guitar. I can't tell that's not a guitar. It's suspended my sense of disbelief. So we'll go back to the presentation. So that was really the quick demo that I wanted to do. There we go. To give you a sense of what's possible. These apps run all the way down to an iPad 2 and an iPhone 4S, which are fairly low-powered by today's comparisons compute devices. And there'll be questions that will come up about how much compute you're using. I'm going to answer those in a bit. And why don't we just dive into it? So what I really want to do today is I want to talk about a little bit about this technology, physical modeling synthesis, and then I want to go through the history of it, because the history is really fascinating. So what is physical modeling synthesis? It's a collection of methods. Unlike people in the graphics space who are able to create a single algorithm pushing polygons and use that in a very versatile way in lots of applications, with regard to physical modeling, we wind up having to create different algorithms for different situations. But as you'll see in a moment, there's actually a relatively small class of different systems that can be modeled using each specific algorithm. What's really powerful about this physical modeling technology is that performers, real musicians, just like Marco Parisi that you saw here, can then interact with the model in the same way that a real musician would interact with the model, and they can create an impassioned performance. So I think the key thing to note here is that physical modeling is a collection of different techniques. And I just added this slide the other day. These are different areas that we've actually been working on and off over the last 20 years. Modeling. Moforte currently is focused very much today on chordophones, which is modeling the string. It's the wave equation of the string. We have a solution to it called the waveguide, and we've extended that, and we've gotten very good at doing that. But there are other areas where there have been significant types of modeling. Aerophones, which are woodwinds. The company Yamaha has done a tremendous job. They have a saxophone, which I'll let you hear in a little bit, that fools me. I can't tell it's not a saxophone. There's membranophones, which are drums. Today they're kind of computationally out of reach, but we can use tricks to try to simulate that. Idiophones, which are mallet instruments. 20 years ago we did a very good job with that, and Moforte is about to embark on revisiting idiophones, things like bells and gongs, metal bars and things like that. And they have their own particular algorithm for solving that. And then there's electrophones, which are electronic instruments. Traditional synthesizers from the 60s and 70s. And we're going to revisit that, and I'm going to show you some great examples of that. That's been happening for the last 20 years. And then we had a previous company called Staccato where we applied the concept of physical modeling synthesis to game sounds. And I'll show you some examples of that. Game sounds used to be very repetitive and boring, and we came up with some techniques where we were really modeling a car engine, so you could accelerate it. It had hysteresis the way a real car engine has. And you could hear the little parts of the car rattling around, and you could have crashes that were statistically different every time you crashed into a wall. And then the human voice. I was talking to someone about this earlier. The human voice is one of the hardest things to model, but there's been a lot of work. In fact, it's its own field. And the human voice is really where all of this kind of starts from. I'm going to skip forward here to this. So it really does all start from trying to model the human voice. And as early as 1100, there's literature that mentions speech machines. And it doesn't talk about how they work, but we have a pretty good idea of how they work. They were modeling the vocal tract as a series of tubes that you had flaps that you could move around in, and a skilled operator could move these flaps around in a way that would make consonants and vowels and perhaps say a few words. And then around 1779, this fellow Christian Kratzenstein figured out that, yeah, the vocal tract really is like 7 different tubes, and he started to build a mechanical device that modeled the various different sounds that can be made by the vocal tract. And if you go to the Exploratorium, since I was a kid, they've had this display at the Exploratorium. They have some lucite tubes that have been bored out with a mill to form the 7 different tubes in different shapes, and you can buzz a little buzzer into it, and darn if it doesn't go ooh, ee, ah. It's all mechanical. And then around 1791, this other fellow built a speech machine based on the ideas that people had had around. And then this is where it gets a little creepy, a little uncanny valley. Is in 1857, this person, M. Faber, made a machine called the Euphonia. And I believe that this is a photograph that has been drawn on, because it looks to me like it's a photograph. But there's this disembodied head, and then there were a number of levers and pedals, and a skilled operator could move things around and they could get it to talk. And I think that that's very interesting, but it must have been creepy at the time as well. So you take this idea of this Euphonia having a way of controlling these tubes, and you bring it forward to the World's Fair in 1939, and there was a machine called the Voder, which was it was a bunch of radio tubes, a bunch of filters. It's the types of things that we would model today in MATLAB. And it was able to speak using a keyboard. And I'm actually going to very quickly play this little video here.
The machine uses only 2 sounds produced electrically. One of these represents the breath. Without it, the vibration of the vocal cords. There are no photograph records or anything of that sort. Only electrical circuits, such as are used in telephone practice. Let's see how you put expression into a sentence. Say, she saw me, with no expression. She saw. Okay. An answer to these questions.
So, that's 1939. Pretty amazing, actually. But keep in mind, it goes back almost 1,000 years at that point. In 1961, a pair of very good scientists, engineers formalized the signal processing circuit, the Kelly-Lockbaum circuit, which is really a starting point for much of the physical modeling that we're doing today. The waveguides that we used to do the strings really have their ancestry in this Kelly-Lockbaum vocal tract model. And a very nice man at Karma, Max Matthews, in 1961 implemented a version of the model on a digital computer. And some of you may have heard this, but this is 1961, digital synthesis of a singing voice. Okay, I'll go ahead and end it there. And what's interesting about that is that Max was there at Karma when we were researchers as well. Max was friends with Arthur C. Clarke, and he showed this model to Arthur C. Clarke. And so Arthur C. Clarke worked it into his book 2001, and you've probably heard this.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
He's singing the same song.
Give me your answer.
So that's the part of the story where the computer was being turned off and he was regressing back to singing Bicycle Built for Two, really a tribute to Max Matthews. Okay, so let's come forward to 1983. A couple of really bright students at Stanford were trying to do a digital oscillator, and computers are still not doing a lot with sound at that point, but they came up with this idea of what if an oscillator could modify itself? Because at that point we're all talking about recursion, we're all talking about self-modifying code, so why not have an oscillator modify itself? And so they came up with this algorithm called Karplus-Strong, and it turns out this algorithm sounds a lot like a string when it's being plucked. And but they described it as a self-modifying wavetable. And one of our close collaborators, David Jaffe, did a composition with this. I'm not going to play all the compositions. I'll skip forward. So what was amazing about that algorithm is it was actually people recognized it as sounding like a guitar. And then what happened is Julius, our third partner, recognized that it was actually a realization of a particular solution for the wave equation called Dahlen-Barrett's solution. It's a graphical solution to the wave equation. And Julius took it much further. He and David extended the algorithm, and then Julius formalized it into something called waveguide. And the one example I'll play for you here is when the Next machine was launched in 1988. Julius was at Next at that time, along with David. And using the 56,000 DSP that was on the Next machine, they created a music system called the Music Kit. And this was how the Next machine was introduced. So this is one of the first commercial physical models. So we go a little bit further, and Julius formalized the Karplus-Strong models into waveguide, and much of what Forte is doing today is derived from waveguide. Parallel to that, one of Julius's students, Perry Cook, was working on, he was revisiting the problem of vocal synthesis and vocal singing synthesis. And I'll just play a couple examples of this, but around 1990, Perry Cook had developed a system called Spasm with he called it Sheila as well, and here's a quick example of that. Sheila. So he spent a bit of time working on vocal synthesis. I do want to mention this one point here. I'm going to say something about commuted synthesis because a lot of the way that we're doing things like acoustic guitars now is with commuted synthesis. Maybe I'll say a little bit more about that since we're all signal processing people. We have models for strings, but to get one of these things to sound like an acoustic guitar, we also have to have a big filter which represents the body of the acoustic guitar. And that filter can actually be out of the range of computing in real time. And so we've tended to not do a lot of these acoustic guitars, but Julius came up with this idea back in 1994 that in fact, instead of playing the output of the string through the body of the guitar, why don't you play the body of the guitar through the string? It's linear time invariant, and it's the same thing. And darn if it doesn't sound just like an acoustic guitar. I'm very sensitive to hearing a guitar, to hearing a piano, to hearing a harpsichord, and I hear this exponentially decaying echo, which is the soundboard or the table of the guitar. And I have a demonstrable example here that you can listen to. But so this was a very important idea as well, as the ability to play the body, the impulse response of the body through the strings rather than playing the strings through the big filter, which is the body. And I'm going to play, these are all commuted synthesis examples. I'm going to play two of them. This is a classical guitar. I hear that subtle boom of the body. And this other one, this was done almost 20 years ago. This is a harpsichord in which the soundboard is being played through the string. I hear very stiff wood. I hear kind of a big moving piece of stiff wood that the harpsichord is based on.
You could probably crank it a little bit if you got some headroom.
I don't have any headroom in that.
You have any headroom?
No. Yeah. Let's see. No, I don't have any headroom. Okay. Okay, now I want to go forward to commercialization.
Just a random question. Why do they do a lot of harpsichords than pianos?
Why did they? Oh, we put
Yeah, there's a lot of examples of harpsichords.
the piano's very hard to do.
Okay.
Yeah, it turns out that the strings of the piano are very, I mean, we'll digress for just a moment and we can talk about this afterwards. The strings are very big in the piano, and they have a vertical mode, they have a horizontal mode, and they have a longitudinal mode, and they have a torsional mode. And they're starting to verge on being bars. So the harmonic positions in the piano string, and some of the piano strings are not on perfect harmonic locations. And so modeling, and I'll play an example for you here in a moment where we tried to model a piano. It's very hard to model a piano, and it turns out that sampling technology, just recording pianos, is just so much easier because people just want a Steinberg. They just want a particular piano, and so the recording technology is the way that that's typically done. Though I will tell you that there are some electronic pianos out there that use a little bit of a physical model to represent the shimmer of the strings when you hold the damper pedal down. So,
We can't see what's on your screen. So you
Oh.
need to plug and unplug or switch something.
yeah, try plug and unplug. Thanks for giving me a heads up about that. I would just barrel forward. There we go. Did you guys see this previous? Oh, you didn't need to see that. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about commercialization of physical modeling. So Yamaha did commercialize what was called FM synthesis, which also came out of Karma in the 80s. And they also took an option to commercialize physical modeling. And they did a synthesizer, which this is honestly one of my favorite synthesizers. I own one. It's called the VL1. And they did extensive physical modeling. There's some things that they did in the synthesizer today. I don't know how they did it. And I hope this technology comes back. The synthesizer ended its life after about 3 years, and they're sold at above original price on the internet on eBay because they're such rare things. But I'll play the saxophone. The saxophone totally fools me. I hear the reed squeaking. I hear the bell. So that was the VL1, and it was a very short-lived product. The real problem, I think the problem with this was, one, is memory became so cheap that sampling became a pervasive technology. It was just easier to go out and record the instruments than try to model them. And then secondarily, musicians have a very strong sense of what sounds right and what doesn't sound right. And so the uncanny valley starts to kick in here, where if it's just not absolutely perfect, people are disturbed by it.
Well, not only that, I might add, it's just as hard to play a saxophone well as it is to play this thing well.
That's true. And for my VL1, I plug a guitar controller, a MIDI guitar controller, and there's a headset that does the breath, and I play it from my guitar, but I have to really work to get it to sound like a saxophone. Has to do with the phrasing. Concurrently, this company called Korg also did a line of synthesizers that embraced physical modeling. And today, they still have a synthesizer out there that uses physical modeling. That may be one of the only commercial synthesizers that uses the technology. So here we go. In 1994, Keyboard Player did, big magazine among us musicians, did 2 articles about why physical modeling was going to be the next big thing. And everybody thought it was going to be the next big thing. It was interactive. It didn't use very much memory. Memory was very expensive at that time. And so, it just seemed logical that was what was going to happen. But that's not what happened. What wound up happening is memory got very cheap very quickly, thanks to the whole computer industry driving the cost of memory down. And a number of companies sprung up that they would just go out and do massive recordings. There was a company that had a product called the Gigasampler, which seemed like a lot of memory at that time, a gigabyte, but it was a gigabyte of piano samples. And now you can get pianos that are even bigger than a gigabyte. You can get enormous sample sets, and every possible MIDI value from 0 to 127 has its own sample that goes behind it. Okay, I want to talk briefly about, there was a project at Stanford that attempted to commercialize the physical modeling technology. Nick and I actually worked for that project. And a lot of what we're doing today derives from that project. And one of the things that came out of that is there was an editor for creating not only physical models, but signal processing models. It was this editor called SynthBuilder. Nick was the primary author of that. and it ran on the next machine, and it had a DSP underneath it. And one of the first things that we hit as we were trying to create these models, because we were supposed to create reductions to practice of all the possible physical models, the first thing that we hit is we didn't have enough compute to go around. And so we, along with a couple of students, threw together this thing called the Frankenstein box, which is 1996. It was a farm of 56,000 DSPs. And we, being very aggressive, we ruthlessly desoldered all the crystals and cranked them up from 40 megahertz to 80 megahertz. Because we wanted to see what we could do. And the types of things that we could do on this farm is that we could do whole ensembles, completely modeled, no samples whatsoever. And I'll play a couple of those examples. Let me go forward. Yeah, here's a really good example. Here's a percussion ensemble, a taiko ensemble. This is all modeled as well. Another example, the one with the piano in it. There's the vibes. Unmodeled acoustic bass. So, going back to that.
We lost your video again.
Oh, here we go. Oh, it's blue. There it is. Okay, it's back. So that was done on this piece of hardware, and one of the things that was developed in those days was this electric guitar model, which what Monforte is doing today derives directly from this electric guitar model. And I'll just play this little sample here. This is 1996. So the model that we have today is much more elaborate than that. It can do a lot more things, but this is one of the starting points. You heard some of this percussion stuff, and there's another technique, because the percussion, the idiophones have their own technique. It's this, we used a technique called couple mode synthesis, but there's lots of different techniques for doing this kind of thing. I will just play one example here, which is the wind chime that sits outside of my bedroom today. We had a technique where we could take recordings of any idiophone, and from those recordings we could extract filter coefficients, and for each wind chime in this wind chime set, it gets reduced down to about 5 or 6 floating point numbers. Shimmer. So if that were done with recordings, every time you hit one of the wind chimes with a mallet, it would start the recording over again, and you would not be retaining energy. You wouldn't be retaining state from the previous time that it was played. You wouldn't get that shimmer. And to my ear, it would completely break my sense that I was listening to a wind chime. I do want to talk briefly about virtual analog electrophones. There was a very bright student, Tim Stilson, who worked at Stanford, who figured out how to model the classic voltage-controlled filter that was in mini-modes. Up until that time, there were not digital realizations of that type of stuff. And I'm just going to play a quick little example here. This is in YouTube.
What we have here is Synth Builder and Synth Core from around 2000 running on my legacy Windows 98 machine. I've got a patch of it running on it.
It's one of the Tim Stilson's Moog VCF patches. I did this as an example. It's got some detuned oscillators in it. I'm going to play it just so you can hear it. Can we get the screen now? Good. So up until around 1997, the whole legacy of electrophones from the 70s and the early 80s had been lost because digital synthesizers were not able to represent those types of filters. And Tim was one of the people who was instrumental in figuring out how to do that stuff digitally. There was a product called Reality that ran on Intel platforms that did some physical modeling, and it was one of the first early software-based synthesizers. And I won't say a lot about it, but it was Dave Smith, the inventor of MIDI, and we helped him out with some of the models that were in that. I talked to someone this evening who worked on the ASP301 chip. There was a chip that attempted to realize physical modeling as well. I think the idea was that if wavetable was in a chip on sound cards, then maybe we need to go to the next level. In the end, everything wound up going native to the processor. Video games wound up using streaming sound, and there was actually no need for a chip like this. I personally programmed on this chip. So we spun a company out of Stanford that, I'll just touch this briefly, that commercialized a software version of a wavetable synthesizer, and we were attempting to commercialize this physical modeling stuff, and we wound up doing something totally different. But one of the interesting things that we did were game sounds. And this is a race car, which the slider or the game controller can interact with it. And this is just a recording of it. This was in a game called NASCAR 2000. And it really was a model of the cylinders and muffler, automated signal processing. Has hysteresis in it. Good putter of the cylinders.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
If you had a subwoofer, would we be hearing a lot of
Yeah.
Okay.
When I play this through my subwoofer at home, it rumbles a lot. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to skip over that. I want to talk a little bit about the technology of how we're doing modeling today. And I'm not sure if anybody has heard of a thing called Faust. But there's a university in France called Graham that has developed a signal processing expression language which is specific to audio signal processing. And there we go. So it's based around the paradigm of block diagrams. And so this is a very simple example here. You write these expressions, and these little things that are colons in here are actually pipes piping the audio, the buffers from one stage to the next. And you can write very complicated, this is a sine wave generator, you can write very complicated signal processing circuits, and you can listen to it in real time, you can experiment with it, you can port it to various different platforms, mobile platforms. You can have it bring up a block diagram so that you can examine the block diagram. And so, at least for what we're doing today, we're using this language Faust to do most of our signal processing. We're not doing machine-level signal processing. We're not doing C-level signal processing. We're doing mostly Faust signal processing. Though at this point, we're starting to consider doing some C++ level signal processing.
The Faust generates C code. Basically just generates a type.
Yeah, thank you.
It's like a local compiler.
The man who, Jan O'Leary, the man who developed Faust, is actually a mathematician, and so he describes the C that comes out as being mathematically correct.
Okay. And it's stream-based also. It stands for functional audio stream. So it's good in situations where you just sort of have like a pipeline going in some kind of loop. But if you have to do tricky things with the sort of state-dependent changes in the system, then it's not so good.
And it's not good for spectral signal processing at all. It's really all time-to-beat signal processing. So I'm going to kind of draw to an end here with a couple examples. This is Vocaloid. Remember, we started with, this starts from vocal synthesis. This is a product from Yamaha, and they've invested a lot in this. It's fairly popular in Japan for doing vocal synthesis, sing-along, karaoke, and they're starting to work on doing it in English. And I just found this little example here today that I thought I'd play. I'll go in the middle of it. Is there an internet connection? Oh, this is the wrong video. It's the wrong video. Uh-oh. Okay.
Got a bad link?
Got a bad link. Okay. Well, I'll fix it in the presentation and repost it. Suffice to say that it sounds a little interesting, but it also sounds a little bit funny as well. And I think they will eventually get there with Vocaloid, but they've got a couple of years of development to go still. There's another company called Smule that attempted to do a version of the violin for the iPad, and that's what this link is here, I think.
After about 8 years of doing this myself, there is a
That sounds very real.
We got an ad. That was an ad. There we go. So I don't think they had this product on the market for very long. I think they fundamentally shifted their business direction towards purely consumer applications.
That's the performance space of Karma.
Yeah, that's at
On
Karma.
the third
Yeah.
floor, in case you're wondering. Yeah, is this presentation online so folks can?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
it's in
you-
2 places.
So I apologize a little bit for the lousy audio quality, but if you put your headphones in when you go home, you can.
Or just listen through your computer speakers. It's a lot louder.
Or just crank it, or set your neighbors off, whatever.
Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the scripted part of the presentation, then we can kind of open it up. I do have a lot of foils, but they usually speak to questions that I'm commonly asked. I do want to point out some things here. People always ask me about, how much of the CPU are you using? And so this is kind of a summary of what we've seen over the years. So on the next machines using the 56,000, we were doing 6-plex. Or 2 to 4 guitar strings using the whole 56,000. It was running at 20 megahertz. And then we upgraded to these cocktail franks, which we were overclocking, and we could do a full guitar in one of those cocktail franks. That's 1996. And then in 1999, we were actually running native on a Pentium, full guitar as well. We were running 6 strings, but we're using up almost all of the Pentium. We're using 80% of the Pentium. And Staccato in 1999 actually attempted to commercialize that guitar, but there was not an opportunity at that point in time. One, because the way you had to interact with it was a slider on a screen, which wasn't very satisfying. And 2, it was just taking up too much of the processor. And then I'm going to digress in a quick story. 2.5 years ago, I met Nick at Karma, and we were just hanging out working on some stuff. And Nick said, hey, I want to get that guitar up and running. The guitar? Yeah, the guitar from 1999. I want to get it up and running on an iPhone. Okay. And so Nick cranked away on it, and then I left. And I came back the next morning, and Nick was there, and he said, I got it running. And he had Smoke on the Water running on an iPhone 4, iPhone 3?
iPhone 4.
iPhone 4. And we realized that these things have got a lot of compute power. And we realized that there's an opportunity here to go revisit some stuff that was really fascinating, but didn't really have a commercial opportunity because there wasn't enough compute to go around. And this isn't just our field. I think there's many fields we're going to see in image processing, in many different fields, where these devices are becoming so powerful that we're going to see lots of new types of applications, signal processing applications.
I see a 14-year gap between 99 and 2013.
That's right.
So, somewhere in the middle of that, I made a port of the guitar to my MacBook Pro, and I was able to get about 30 checkpoint. I think that was maybe only a port duo. So with a modern MacBook Pro, I mean, with these guitar strings we have right now, we get a lot going.
Yeah, we can get a whole
know how much
ensemble going.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're not limited by compute. What actually limits us by compute is that we have a very large effects chain, reverb, echo, flanger, chorus. That's actually where we're chewing up almost all of our compute at this point, and it's not in the model itself. Though those things are modeled as well. Okay, I'm just going to bring it to kind of a close here. So we've been on this path, working on these physical models, the 3 of us, for the last 20 years, and this is where we've landed today, is we have this one product in the market called Mo Forte Guitar. You can play with it. It was really an experiment. We used it to build our core model, our core code base. All of our applications are built on top of the same code base. We just recently previewed this application called GeoShred, which I can talk about if people are interested. But that's a thing for musicians. You can actually really play it. You saw Marco Parisi playing it. And I love playing it. It's a powerful instrument. It's a new kind of instrument. And it's based on modeling, but it goes way beyond modeling. You can do things like you can solo with 6 simultaneous strings in parallel with feedback and distortion. And I can demonstrate that to some folks if you guys want to see it. It's a very, very interesting product. And then the effects chain, which is also modeled, we're modeling classic effects units. That's also been, we've gone into that direction as far as modeling is concerned as well. I think that's about what I'm going to say about the history of physical modeling. And what I'd like to do is I have a lot more slides, but I'd like to jump to them as questions come up. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask? You were first. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you have any features where you can get the feeling back into your fingers of the sound?
Well,
which is a,
that's an interesting
ergonomics part of it.
Yeah, so that's called haptic feedback.
Yeah.
And the problem with these touch screens is they completely lack haptic feedback.
I know.
And so we've tried experiments with on the phone, buzzing the buzzer, the vibrator, to try to give you a sense that you're feeling it. And that really wasn't really worthwhile. But what has happened is this iPad Air, you've probably heard about these things bending if you put too much pressure on them. The back is so thin, and I'll let you come and play it. The back is so thin that when you play it, you feel the strings vibrating through the back, and so you get this haptic feedback anyway.
Unless you're going audio out.
Yeah, and then you lose it. But when you play it on the desktop, and the speaker on this thing is actually quite loud compared to the earlier iPads. When you play it on a desktop, or when you play it in your hands, you feel it. You feel this instrument. And I do a thing for my 2 daughters where I set it down on top of the table of my guitar, and it resonates, and so you get this really big sound coming out of it. The
haptics part of what a musician playing an instrument is so important.
Yeah.
Not just playing what they hear.
And I should tell you, there are a number of students at Stanford that are working on haptic things to add to these devices that give you some haptic experience, including ways to play, to pluck, using external controllers. We've been talking about somebody who has a pressure sensing pad. There's no pressure sensing on this, so you can't get velocity from it. People hit it harder, hoping it's going to be louder, and there's no pressure sensing. But there's a student who's come up with an idea of putting a pad behind it to try to anecdotally sense the pressure that's being hit on it. And we've tried using the accelerometer. We tried using the spot side. There isn't a satisfying solution for that kind of stuff. Good question. What was,
Can I interrupt a little bit? Just because I know we're going to lose everybody after a little while, but before we have plenty of time for questions,
Oh, yeah.
please
Great.
stay. But before we move on, I wanted to present Pat with a certificate of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you very much. This is going to hang in Moforte World Headquarters, which is my garage. Wow, thank you very much. This is fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
So please continue
Yeah.
with the questions.
Go ahead with your question.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the actual models that you're using, the system theory behind it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let's go back, and I'm going to look at this diagram. Actually says a lot. If I can go back a little bit further, and we'll see if we can find it. There we go. Actually, I'm going to start with that diagram. In its most fundamental form, the model of the string is a delay line, which is the length of the delay line is equal to the period of the sound that it's to generate. And if you took a delay line and fed it back on itself, barring interpolation, it would just ring forever. If you put a little click into it, it would just be. Well, it turns out it doesn't because interpolation causes it to lose some energy. So this is the delay line that you see here. This thing here you see is the excitation, which is usually a little click, and there's some special magic about that excitation. And then there's usually something that degrades the signal every time it gets copied around. Every time you photocopy it, it gets degraded. And what's happening in a real string is the initial pulse that impacts on the string is going to the end, to the termination. It's reflecting and coming back, and then reflecting and coming back, and it's losing a little bit of energy to the bridge and the nut every time it goes up and down the length of the string. And that's what this is modeling, is the filter, this filter that's right here is in modeling that little bit of loss that's happening every time the pulse hits one of the two terminations. And the design of this filter is absolutely key. In fact, I'll talk about something in a minute called calibration, where we can take recordings of real guitar strings and we can come up with filter coefficients for this filter such that the string model decays, its high harmonics decay away, its low harmonics decay away in a way that matches the original recording. And that's really the key to all this stuff. These are actually very simple apparatus to implement this. Now this is Carpless Strong. Waveguide is a bit more complicated because it represents the two sides of the string, and it represents the fact that D'Alembert's solution was actually two traveling waves traveling in opposite directions. But it essentially comes down to the same thing, is that there's a termination on either side that causes a loss of energy, and there's an initial signal which is propagating up and down the length of the string, or the length of the delay lines in this case. You want to ask more? Go ahead.
Yeah. So you don't have a nonlinear component in the model?
There can be nonlinear components. We tend to not do that because we will sometimes put an all-pass filter in there to represent some nonlinearity, and that will cause the harmonics to not be at 1, 2, 3, 4. It causes them to be at non-integer positions. But the string itself, unless it's stretched very far, tends to not have a nonlinear component. We're modeling fairly linear strings.
That's stiffness.
Yeah, that's stiffness. And that's what I was saying about the piano. Once you get to these big piano strings, then you start to get nonlinearities in the strings. And there's a number of techniques for modeling those things.
Thank you.
I think there's somebody over here in the team. Go ahead.
So when you mentioned solving the vibration equation,
The wave
this
equation.
model,
Yes.
and this model, the signals, are you modeling pressure or displacement?
It's displacement. Because that's what a guitar pickup or the body of a guitar picks up. The guitar pickup is looking up at the string and it's seeing the string get closer and further away. And we tend to derive from electric guitars. Acoustic guitars are very similar in the same way, except that displacement is causing air pressure in the opening.
I think in the case of the flute, it might be air pressure. Right?
It is, yeah, that's an aerophone model. That's a different model.
But it's similar. I mean, I think there's just another loop around it.
Yeah, there's another loop around.
Yeah.
I do want to say something though. Is people often ask us, well, can I make the strings out of different kinds of metal, or can I make the body super large, or can I make the strings super stiff? It turns out that you can make the strings that we can model having the strings made out of different metal, but what we really do is we'll just look at the recordings of bronze strings or gut strings or nylon strings, and we see what's going on with the spectra over time. The high harmonics in the nylon string decay quickly, the high harmonics in the bronze strings ring out for a long time, and we just force the filter to match the recording that we started with. Yeah, it's calibration, and if you want, I can show you. I'll dive really far forward here. I'll show you a graph very briefly. It's hard to do this in a PDF, but Julius has this. If you see Julius's Facebook page, he has this wonderful image on his page, which is one of the calibration spectra. And that's what we're doing, is we're trying to fit a filter. We're trying to fit those, what we call loop filters, to match the original recordings, so that the, let's see, we're almost there. I have lots of extra information. There we go. Okay, this is actually, these are some calibration diagrams, and I have to look at these up close to see what's in these. But what we have here is, let's see, this is time, and yeah, this is time. These are spectral, these are partials of the harmonics, and this is the rate that the harmonics decay away. And so, like I said, for nylon strings or gut strings, the high harmonics decay away very quickly. They lose energy very quickly because of the material they're made out of. And for metal strings, they ring out for a long time. So rather than trying to model the material and coming up with some kind of physical model of the material itself, what we do is we say, let's come up with a filter that matches the result. And that's how we do calibration. So these diagrams are actually part of the calibration software that we use. We take an original recording of a bronze string, a gut string. We run our calibration software on it, and what we wind up designing is a filter, a loop filter, that approximates or can get very close to the actual sound that was coming out of the string.
One last one.
Yeah, one.
How do you map from the vibration displacement to pressure?
Well, right now we're doing electric guitars, and it's displacement. The pickup is picking up.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
yeah, and for the acoustic guitars, it's an approximation. And much of what we do, just say it out front, much of what we do are approximations to get there because of the amount of compute to actually model it from a physical process at a very detailed level is very high. So we do approximations that still have physicality, but yield the same result. Like Pong.
You're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I think it's like Pong is a good example. Okay, what was the next question? Go ahead.
Yes, early on you mentioned that there are a few models that are still compute bound in terms of real time. Are there any particular signal processing algorithms or mathematical processes that are standing out as being very compute intensive?
I know that people have tried to do, and I've heard some of these examples of membranes. So membranophones are hard, drum heads. And people have tried to do what are called waveguide meshes. And in many ways, that's a signal processing equivalent of finite element analysis. And I don't think anybody's doing that in real time, or they do it with low orders of elements in the mesh, and then the ones are not sounding that good. But I've heard sound examples with very high orders of elements in the mesh, and it does sound pretty good. So you can hear a timpani that really sounds like a timpani and has that whoa, where it elastically shifts its pitch because the material is being stretched. And so membranophones, I think, are going to be the hard problem to solve.
And also in the string, it's just getting the extra modes of vibration.
Yeah, that's your question. It's like a pickup. We're only doing the vertical mode of vibration, but there is a horizontal mode because the string might vibrate like this and it might twist torsionally. And we can actually see that in the audio recordings in the time domain. You don't see an exponential decay in the real recordings. You see a wobble. And that's coupling between the X and Y modes of the string.
And especially in the membranophones, if there are two separate membranes parallel to each other vibrating, it's much more difficult.
Yeah.
Like in a tabla or
I'm sure you're getting lots of coupling, very interesting coupling there.
So, can I get one more?
One more, yeah.
Has anyone tried to use like a deep neural network or something to help model these filters?
You know, I was talking to our other business partner is Jordan Rudis, who keyboardist for Dream Theater. We're doing this new product with him, and I was talking to him about this. And I saw a thing up at SynMath up in Berkeley. Those guys have been trying to do a completely different approach to physical modeling, which is spectral morphing, but not crossfading, which doesn't sound like anything, and not just mapping the harmonics from one spectra to another. They're actually trying to do some interesting and intelligent way of morphing one spectra to another, and they're using neural nets to do that type of stuff. And the example that I heard that I told Jordan about, and I haven't seen where this stuff has gone, so I'm just going to tell you what I heard 15 years ago. I heard a cello being morphed into Robert Plant from the live recording of A Whole Lot of Love. And Robert Plant is doing this sort of impassioned, kind of screaming and moaning, and the cello, of course, the cello is his own kind of moaning. And the sound, the transformation of the sound did not sound like a crossfade, and it did not sound like a spectral mapping. It sounded like one instrument was turning into the other, and it was an amazing thing. It was done with neural nets. Go ahead.
So do you have any issues with artist rights if you record an artist and then sell their simulation commercially, if any of those issues come up?
Yeah, well, the basic issue is, and this is I'll be totally open about this. This is what stalled Mo-Forte guitar. Mo-Forte guitar's business model was to enable everyone to play like Jimi Hendrix. And in order to do that, we needed to go out and license content from the publishers, not from the record labels, but from the person who owned the rights to the song. And we just hit a lot of roadblocks on licensing. But they weren't roadblocks that couldn't be solved with money, but we didn't have the money to do that. We're still operating out of my garage right now. So yes, there are roadblocks, and most of the roadblocks have to do with enabling somebody to play somebody else's music, because the person who authored that song, the composer, is owed a royalty. And there's a lot of gray area about, I mean, you probably know this, that for a while the publishers, the people who wrote the songs, wanted to collect a royalty every time your ringtone played on your phone. So there's a lot of gray area in that. So we decided to make a shift and focus on making things for musicians. Okay. Other questions? Get in the back.
So you mentioned you use Faust, the language, to do the models.
Yeah, Faust.
But how do you move that to mobile platform? Is that intermediate step before?
Okay, so there's something that I didn't clearly say about Faust, and I'll explain that. You write your signal processing circuit in Faust. It's an equation language, and it has pipe operators. It's very nice to work with. And when you compile it, it compiles it into C++. But that's just a lump of C++. There's not a lot that you can do with that. The most important part of Faust is that it has the concept of architectures, where you can then link your signal processing circuit to an architecture. And there's an existing architecture for Mac OS, for Windows, for Linux, for iOS, for Android. And so you literally can write a Faust program, and if you say Faust Android, boom, an Android program comes out, and it's on your phone, and you can run it on your phone. So what we did is we wrote our own architecture for Moforte that was specific to our application. And so we take the lump of C++ and we absorb it into our architecture, and then it works on our mobile platform. If we had wanted to, we could have used the iOS architecture, but you get limited UI options when you use the built-in architecture. And that's the other thing to say, is when you write your Faust program, you can call it sliders and buttons. So you can actually go literally to an audio signal processing program that has a minimal UI just by writing a few equations.
Have you? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
You had a question before me.
Okay, you want to go ahead?
I'll just follow up what you're saying. Is Faust making use of the GPU somehow directly into C++?
It's just direct C++. We've had discussions with a couple companies like Qualcomm about retargeting the Faust code that comes out for. There's a DSP called Hexagon that's on the Qualcomm processors, and we may, sort of as a bulk manual step, retarget the code for one of those specific processors. But right now, we're just running native on the iOS.
Using you, in theory, get tremendous gains in performance GPUs?
Definitely. Well, you mean using GPU?
But then there's latency.
There's big latency issues.
You got to get back to the audio thread somehow. So I think there are some issues with that.
I can tell you what the NVIDIA guys.
That's where we did think about it.
Yeah, I can tell you what the NVIDIA guys told me, because we actually proposed to NVIDIA that let's get this stuff running on, using GPU on the NVIDIA processors, and they discouraged us. They said, well, the problem is getting on and off the GPU is very big, and so like 60 milliseconds of latency getting on and off, and so that would not meet the requirements we have of trying to give a real-time experience both to consumers and to musicians.
Yeah, we can do better than that.
Pardon me?
We can do better than that.
With what?
Good, let's talk.
Yeah, let's talk.
I just want to have one
Go ahead.
question there. You said it's generally C++, right? But later on, if you...
So CUDA is the GPU language for NVIDIA, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we're not set up to do that. We're set up to go to native C on many different platforms. And the point I was making about GPU is that we had a discussion with NVIDIA, and they discouraged us from doing it. Now, do you work with the NVIDIA processors?
I work for AMD.
Okay, great. So that's okay. So we should talk about that. So no, we're not set up to use things like CUDA. We're highly real-time dependent. So for the applications where we give people the experience of feeling like they're playing guitar, including the video game, we need to hit it in around 20 milliseconds from the time you hit the screen to the time that the user hears the sound. And for consumers, if they don't hear it in 20 milliseconds, they go, this isn't fun. You know, it feels like a weird experience. And for musicians, they just get frustrated. And you know, our other business partner, Jordan Rudis, when things aren't responding on the screen, I can tell he's frustrated. I can read his body language. And so we're so real-time focused that we're not looking at those types of things where we have to get on and off an external processor. Would like to if there's fast ways to do that. Go ahead.
So from the code that you get generated from Faust, right? Did you have to do a lot of optimization on the actual result of that, or just use as is?
So we don't optimize it. It's really tight right now.
Oh,
And it will do things like loop unraveling, and it knows about somewhat basic strategies. If we have something, and we were talking about this the other night, the realization, the representation of the algorithm is in Faust, and once it becomes fossilized, ossified, you know, where it's not changing, there's no reason why we wouldn't assign a resource to turn that into hand-coded C. And no, we haven't done that to date, but we were actually talking the other night about doing that. That's really a resource thing, because right now we're 2.2 people. There's Nick and myself, and then Julius 1 day a week. Should we change our situation where we have more resources, then that would probably be one of the things that we do, because we can get more out of a mobile device by hand optimizing the code.
It's pretty amazing you can get those results.
We're getting great results.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. But what's helping us is that Apple, and we're only working in the Apple platforms right now, but the same thing's going on in the Android world, is these processors for mobile computing are increasing in performance so quickly that we're just riding that wave. It's, you know, it was completely unexpected.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
So, a business model, how do you turn this into a profitable business?
That's a good question. So the first product was actually, it's what's called a freemium product. It was actually free. Forte Guitar, you downloaded it.
Yeah, well, I saw you guys in here 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I do remember talking to you. Yeah. So the business model for Forte Guitar was to sell content, just like Smule. You know, it's a piano roll model, right? And we got stymied because of the amount of capital that we would have to put out, both for licensing the content and also for marketing it. So what we've done with Forte Guitar, it's still there. We're still keeping it free. We've repositioned it as this is a fun program. There's an editor, enter your chords and use it for accompaniment. And you can see a video of me using it for some jazz accompaniment. And I just, you know, bam, 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 enter my chords, hit play. It has a whole concept of how guitar players perform. It's got strums built into it. It's statistically varying how everything is hitting the model. And it's a very nice accompaniment experience. And so that's what we've done with that. Now, the new product, which is called GeoShred, it's targeted at musicians. It's actually being sold. It's a premium, or it's a paid product. But the problem there with that is that the business model in app stores is very degraded compared to box software. So that's fine. We're going to go ahead and accept that. We're going to make it up in volume to some degree, but we also have a plan to do peripherals, external devices, high margin, low cost. And what's really interesting thing about that is we can actually use the fact that we can get most of the functionality that would normally go in a peripheral and get it up into the device. So we can bring down the cost of the peripheral while it still has a perceived value of being higher than the actual metal and buttons that are in it.
We're going to kill them with cables.
Kill them with cables, yeah. Yeah. If you want to take a look at the Power Stomp video that's on our YouTube channel, there's a 3D video of the pedal that we're going to build for Power Stomp. Power Stomp is a replacement for all the effects that people put on the floor, and we believe that heavy gear, expensive gear is going to be replaced by a small app that you put on your phone, and a peripheral which we'll gladly sell to you, which has a high margin.
Right. And there still is a bit of a window for good cables because, right, it's still for a little bit fragile kind of cable you get.
I think he was next.
Yeah.
So do you try to model the interaction between the 6 strings?
That's a very good question. No, there's no coupling between the strings right now, beyond the fact that they're summing together in a summer. we have some experimental models that do first coupling between the X and the Y modes of the string, and then greater coupling between the strings themselves. And it's not hard to do. Coupling really means you take a little bit of the output and you feed it. I guess actually, if you just turn up the feedback, you're getting coupling between the strings.
Sure, you're getting coupling feedback.
Yeah.
Wasn't there like a bridge coupling?
Well, coupled mode synthesis for idiophones does a high degree of coupling. You could do strings with coupled mode synthesis. But if you listen to that wind chime example, I can hear it. There's a huge amount of coupling going on between the harmonics. There's this shimmer that you would hear from that kind of thing that you would never hear from a set of recorded samples. And you can send me a note afterwards, and I'll send you a link to where that wind chime sample is. I think it's actually in the deck as well. But when I listen to that, I'm totally fooled. I can hear that shimmer. And honestly, one of my favorite sounds in the world is to take the piano and hold the damper down and play a chord and then listen to the shimmer afterwards, which is the strings fighting with each other, trading energy back and forth. That's what you get out of coupled mode synthesis. So.
Has anyone ever tried to estimate the amount of compute it would take to really model all the strings of the piano doing that?
Well, we can do an estimate of that now, but the piano offers some other computational opportunities. I mean, I think we're probably pretty close to a point in time when we can do the whole piano using coupling, using longitudinal modes, torsional modes, XY modes. But the reason for doing that is to get very accurate, but the commercial opportunity may not be there because sample sets are so good at this point in time. I mean, literally,
I'll tell you, I don't think they perfectly model the shimmering and the interaction.
Well, they don't. But there was a piano called General Music that actually built 6 carpless strong strings, and they fed the samples through the carpless strong strings to represent the shimmer. And I heard it, and I said, wow, that sounds really great. And that was 15 years ago. And I think there's quite a few digital pianos that don't make it. They'll say they have modeling technology.
Have you ever heard the Synthogy one?
Yeah.
I played it over at Manfred.
I mean, it's very good, but you still know that it's not.
A lot of it's just the pedal effect to it. Now that they've got a sort of continuous pedal on that thing.
Yeah, you got the SC3 pedal. It's still pretty good. It's still not quite.
But yeah, you're right. It's still compared to a real piano.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if there are any people in the industry or in the music profession who are working on kind of new instruments, because I mean, it's really cool to model physical instruments. You never quite get it exactly. Maybe you can do something that can be done physically that's better, and then there'll be some musician who will take that up.
So the BL1 actually attempted to do that 15 years ago. They had tried to create new instruments, and Jordan is pushing us all the time. I want to make a guitar that's super stiff, bronze strings. That's the body of the guitar is 5 feet wide or something like that. And I think there is some attempt to do that. The underlying problem with all this modeling stuff, because we've really invested ourselves passionately in this, is if you look at modeling in the computer graphics industry, a huge amount of investment has been made in that, and there's been a huge amount of return on investment because of video games. The amount of investment that's been made to audio modeling is fractional by comparison. And if you read the Wikipedia article about physical modeling, there's an interesting sentence in there. It says one of the reasons it didn't catch on is because the cost of investigation was too high. And that's true. There's just in the products that came out, there was just a very little amount of investigation that went into that. We've actually taken it upon ourselves over the last 2.5 years to say, look, we're just really going to nail this thing because we know it's possible. We don't have a big corporate partner funding us, and we're doing it because we want to get there and have the most interesting model in the world. And will we do instruments that are not like real instruments? Yeah, we'll certainly go to that.
Well, I mean, GeoShred is like that.
Well, let me show you something that GeoShred.
It actually is kind of a hybrid. Yeah.
It's a hybrid between a synthesizer and a string model. Let me just see. Do I have any volume here whatsoever?
It's schizophrenic, right? The multi-personalities.
I think
what happened to the audio?
I think they've got shut down.
Is there a...
No.
Let me just restart GeoShred.
Is your pedal, is your audio cable in?
Why don't you take the audio out and see if it plays here?
Place here? There, we got it back. Okay, I'm just going to show you something. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll show 2 things here. So one of the things about this model is it has feedback and distortion, and I've got this expression pad here, which allows me to play with the amplifier distance. So I can go. that's really a model of a guitar. But what if I said when I'm soloing, I'm going to have 3 strings that are being played in unison. So we actually have in this new product a number of sounds or instruments that are based on the guitar, but they sort of are hybrid between a guitar and a synthesizer. So that's essentially 4 one-string guitars working together in parallel, and that's not something that's in the real world. It's something that's easily realizable with the model that we have today. Other questions? Go ahead.
Have you done any experiments with like audio input to this physical modeling? Like with the trumpet, you can sort of sing into it, I think. There's all sorts of...
So a couple thoughts there is that the percussion models, we don't have any percussion models here, but we're about to embark on reviving the coupled mode synthesis percussion models. They're set up so that you hit them with an impulse, a mallet, a hard or a soft mallet, and they resonate. There's no reason why you can't take an external audio signal and play them into those percussion models. And then the guitar model here, we're using, as an excitation, we're using some special little seed, little kernel that we gather from real guitars to excite them. But there's no reason why you can't have an external source coming from outside. And one of the students at Stanford has set up a very interesting piezoelectric thing that allows you to finger pick these credit cards, and it really feels like you're finger picking the guitar. Okay, any other questions?
I had a question. I guess this is from like the core issue of physical modeling. You know, like the process of coming up with those models. I guess how long it takes. You know, usually what's the approach to, let's say I want to model a sound of, I don't know, a drum or a guitar or a voice.
So
it's experimental. You have different ways to.
There's roughly 7 classes of algorithms. There's chordophones, which are strings. There's aerophones, which are tubes that are being driven and have impedance losses in them. There's membranophones, which are drum heads. There's idiophones, which are things that you hit and they resonate. There's electrophones, which are a whole class of classic electronic instruments, organs, synthesizers, things like that. And then there's the human voice. And that's a starting point. And there's well-known algorithms, but there's a lot of different well-known algorithms. People have worked on different algorithms. And then once you have an algorithm, that's only half the magic. The other half of the magic is once you've set up your algorithm, like this guitar algorithm, you have to go to a real source of a real recording, and you have to have a way to extract, to calibrate some data, usually filter coefficients, so that your model, your algorithm is going to respond the way the real instrument responds. So I would say in some cases, for the string, the chordophones, we're reaching the point with calibration where we can take almost any recording and we can extract kind of its soul from the recording. But then when we discover new behaviors, Jordan was showing me a sort of a zither from China that when you played it, you could hear the strings from both sides of the bridge, and when you press down on one side, okay, now that's something that has to be added to the model to model that kind of behavior. So you can
get like a Boolean.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. And he was saying to me he wants to sound like that, and I said, okay, well we need to get the first step done.
Yeah,
that's a whole new project.
Similar to that Santoor, the Persian being played a lot more in India.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's not a clear answer. Sometimes we can go right to the solution and we have techniques, but there's a lot of techniques that still need to be developed. And my overreaching thing is there's been very, very little investment in research. There's a lot of students very enthusiastically researching this. Research will go on for years.
That's cool.
Any other questions?
Good presentation.